The contract trembled in my hands as I watched my sister accept the Grammy for Best New Artist, the award that should have been mine. In my first life, I'd written every song she claimed, sacrificed my dreams to make her shine, and died unknown in a car crash while rushing to her next recording session. But the universe gave me a second chance. This time, I woke up 3 years before her debut, armed with knowledge of every hit song, every industry connection, every betrayal that would come. This time, I would let Maya have her spotlight while I built my empire in the shadows. The coffee in my childhood bedroom tasted bitter with possibility. This time, things would be different. This time, I would be the one holding all the cards. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room was the first thing that really broke through the morphine haze. It was a smell I'd come to associate with endings. The steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was a liar, a mechanical optimist insisting on a future my body knew wasn't coming. From the small television mounted in the corner of the room, the glitz and glamour of the Grammy Awards seemed like a broadcast from another planet, and in a way, it was. And the Grammy for Best New Artist goes to Maya. The room erupted. On screen, my sister, my beautiful, effervescent, talented sister, leapt to her feet. Her sequined dress caught the light, shattering it into 1,000 tiny stars that danced across the room, across my sterile white blanket. She hugged the presenter, a rock legend whose poster used to hang on my side of our shared bedroom wall. She practically floated to the stage, a vision of shock and humility. I knew that look. I'd helped her practice it in the mirror for weeks. I tried to push the button for more pain medication, but my arm wouldn't cooperate. It was a dead weight, just like the rest of me. My gaze drifted to the window, where rain slicked the glass, blurring the city lights into a watercolor mess. Rain. It was always raining when my life ended. The memory hit me like the truck that had actually done the job. It was 3 nights before the Grammy nominations were even announced. The final masters for Maya's debut album, Stolen Skies, were due at the studio by 6 a.m. Of course, she'd only finished her vocals, her flat, pitchy, needed a miracle vocals, at 2 a.m. The miracle, as always, was me. My job was to take her raw, unimpressive tracks and weave them into gold. "Ella, you're a lifesaver," she'd chirped, kissing my cheek before waltzing out of the studio, her purse swinging. "I'm just so drained. I need my beauty sleep for the pre-nomination party tomorrow. Don't forget to add those harmonies on the bridge for Midnight Dreams. You know, the ones I was humming earlier?" She hadn't been humming anything. Those harmonies were mine, scribbled on a napkin during a particularly soul-crushing lunch with our father, where he'd once again explained why the label needed a face, like Maya, not a behind-the-scenes type like me. I'd spent the next 4 hours hunched over the mixing board, my fingers flying, my world shrinking to sound waves and decibels. My hands were cramping, a familiar ache that had been my constant companion for years. My vision blurred from staring at the screen, my diet for the past 2 days consisting of stale coffee and the bitter taste of resentment. At 5:15 a.m., it was done. A masterpiece of production, an album so full of raw, gut-wrenching emotion that no one would ever guess its star had the emotional depth of a puddle. I grabbed the hard drive, my only jacket, and ran out into the torrential downpour. The streets were slick and empty. My little sedan hydroplaned twice, my heart hammering against my ribs. Not from the near misses, but from the terror of being late, of failing her, of letting down the family. I was 10 minutes from the studio when I saw them. Just 2 pinpricks of light in the distance, growing impossibly fast. The squeal of tires was drowned out by the storm. I remember a singular paralyzing thought. The album. If I die, Maya's album dies with me. It was my last coherent thought before the world exploded into a symphony of shattering glass and crushing metal. Back in the hospital, Maya was at the podium, tears streaming down her perfect face. She clutched the golden gramophone to her chest. My gramophone. "Wow," she breathed into the microphone, her voice trembling with expertly feigned emotion. I don't even know what to say. This has been such a journey of self-discovery, finding my voice, learning to trust my own creative instincts. A choked, guttural sound escaped my throat. It might have been a laugh or a sob. My instincts. My voice. She was holding my trophy, accepting praise for my pain, my sleepless nights, my entire soul, which I had poured into that music. The heart monitor began to beep faster, a frantic, panicked rhythm. A nurse rushed in, her face a mask of professional concern. "Her pressure is dropping," she said to someone I couldn't see. Maya's voice droned on from the TV. "I want to thank my family, my mom and dad, for always believing in me." She paused, her lower lip trembling. "And most of all, I want to thank my sister Ella. She's not well, but she's my biggest inspiration. I wouldn't be here without her." The lie was so audacious, so complete, it was almost brilliant. It cut deeper than any physical pain. The beeping of the monitor grew shrill, then steadied into a single, unending tone. The last thing I saw was Maya, my sister, blowing a kiss to the camera, to the world that thought she was a star as my own world faded to black. A gasp tore from my lungs, raw and painful. I shot upright, my heart hammering a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. But there was no beeping monitor, no antiseptic smell, no sterile white room. Instead, I smelled pancakes and lavender laundry detergent. My eyes flew open. I was in my childhood bedroom. Not the small, sterile apartment I'd lived in before the crash, but my actual bedroom. The one with the faded floral wallpaper and the collection of snow globes on the bookshelf. The one with the poster of that rock legend still taped to the wall, my side of the wall. My gaze darted around the room, taking in the impossible details. The stack of CDs on my desk. Artists I hadn't listened to in years. The clunky desktop computer with its bulky monitor, not the sleek laptop I'd died with. And scattered across the desk, like ghosts from a past I'd already lived, were Maya's demo tapes, cassette tapes, the ones she'd made before she ever got a record deal, the ones I had stayed up all night coaching her through, line by painful line. "Ella, breakfast!" My mom's voice called from downstairs. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years, not since she'd stopped speaking to me for sowing discord in the family by asking for a writing credit. My hands flew to my face. They were young. Smooth. No calluses from endless hours on a guitar. No faint scars from a kitchen accident in my lonely apartment. I scrambled out of bed, my legs shaky, and snatched my phone from the nightstand. It was a flip phone. A pink, glittery, ridiculous flip phone. I flipped it open, my breath catching in my throat. The date stared back at me. June 14th, 2022. 3 years. I was 3 years in the past. 3 years before Maya's debut. 3 years before she became a star, 3 years before I became a ghostwriter, a workhorse, a casualty. My heart didn't slow down. If anything, it beat harder, but not with fear. With a wild, terrifying, exhilarating surge of possibility. I walked to the full-length mirror on my closet door and stared at my reflection. I was 16 again. My face was rounder, softer, free of the perpetual exhaustion that had become my defining feature. My eyes, though wide with shock, weren't shadowed with the cynicism and hurt that had consumed me. I looked young, naive, breakable. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I had every memory, every painful lesson, every single note of every hit song that was yet to be written. I knew every betrayal before it happened, every lie before it was spoken. Maya thought she was destined for the spotlight. My family thought they had their golden goose. They were all wrong. I leaned closer to the mirror, my reflection staring back with a new, hard-edged glint in her eyes. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. "Okay, Maya," I whispered to the empty room, the scent of my mother's blissfully ignorant pancakes wafting up the stairs like a cruel joke. "You can have the spotlight. You can have the fame, the adoration, the whole damn show." I picked up one of the demo tapes, running my thumb over her scrawled, childish handwriting. "Let them all think nothing has changed," I murmured, my voice a quiet vow. "While I change everything." The first test of my new reality came, as most things did in our house, at the breakfast table. The scene was so achingly familiar it felt like a rerun of a show I'd been forced to watch 1,000 times. Dad was hidden behind the business section of the newspaper, Mom was fussing over Maya, and I was the invisible audience member. "Honey, you were up so late last night, I heard you humming," Mom said, placing a plate piled high with pancakes in front of Maya. She slid a much smaller plate in my direction without looking at me. Another stroke of genius? I nearly choked on my orange juice. The melody she was talking about was mine. I'd been working on it yesterday afternoon, humming it softly at my desk while supposedly doing homework, testing my muscle memory, seeing if the music still lived in my fingertips. It did. Apparently, it also lived in my sister's criminally opportunistic ears. Maya gave a demure little shrug, poking at her pancakes with a fork. I don't know, Mom. It's just there. It flows through me, you know? She looked up, her big brown eyes wide and sincere. It's like the universe is sending me these little gifts. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her the universe hadn't sent her jack squat, but I had. Instead, I just took a slow sip of juice, the acidic burn grounding me. In my first life, I would have been bursting with pride. See, Mom, that was my melody. Isn't it great? And Mom would have smiled indulgently and said, That's nice, dear. Maya, tell us more about your song. I'd learned early that my contributions were only valuable once Maya had claimed them as her own. Well, it's a gift you need to share, sweetie, Dad said, finally lowering his paper. His eyes, when they landed on Maya, were warm with a pride he'd never once shown me. I was on the phone with Jim last night, Jim from Starfire Records. My fork clattered onto my plate. Starfire Records, that was where it all began. Jim was the AANDR executive who would eventually sign her, launching her career into the stratosphere. He said he's got a slot open for a showcase next month. He's looking for fresh new talent, someone with an authentic voice. Dad continued, puffing his chest out. I told him I might just know the perfect girl. Maya gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in that practiced gesture of surprise. Oh my God, Dad, really? But I don't know if I'm ready. Nonsense, Mom cooed. You were born ready. That new song you're working on will be perfect. I watched the performance, a silent spectator to my own erasure. It was brilliant, really. The loving parents, the humble prodigy. A perfect little family tableau. I just didn't have a part in it. Not a visible one, anyway. Later that afternoon, my best friend Chloe came over. In my first life, Chloe had been my confidant, the one person I thought I could trust. I'd cried on her shoulder after every slight, every stolen song, every moment of casual cruelty from our family. She had always been there with a comforting hug and words of encouragement. It wasn't until after my death that the full scope of her betrayal would have been revealed. But now, armed with foreknowledge, I saw everything with painful clarity. She breezed into my room, her designer bag slung over her shoulder, and immediately made a beeline for my desk. Working on anything good, Ella? My songbook, a worn leather journal filled with my lyrics, my chords, my soul, was lying open. Before I could close it, she snatched it up. Ooh, what's this? She chirped, her eyes scanning the page. I saw her manicured fingers, the nails painted a glossy blood red, linger on a set of lyrics. City lights paint scars across a midnight dream. They were the opening lines to Midnight Dreams, the song that would become Maya's first #1 hit. The song she was supposedly writing right now, thanks to the gifts from the universe. This is really good, Chloe said, her voice laced with a strange, acquisitive hunger. Like professionally good. Are you writing this for Maya? In my first life, I'd stammered a yes. Yeah, just helping her out with some ideas. I was so desperate for anyone's approval, even secondhand, that I'd willingly give my work away. This time, I just smiled a non-committal smile. Just messing around with some ideas, I said, gently taking the book from her hands and closing it. I placed it back on the desk, but not before I saw the flicker of annoyance in her eyes. The greed was there, plain as day, now that I knew to look for it. She hadn't been my friend, she'd been a scout, assessing my untapped resources for Maya's benefit. Well, you should let her see it, Chloe pressed, a little too eagerly. She's been having such a hard time with her writer's block lately. It would be a huge help. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place later that evening. I was supposed to be at the library, but I'd forgotten a textbook. I let myself in the front door quietly and heard my father's voice coming from his study, the door slightly ajar. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. Look, Jim, the kid is a star, Dad was saying, his voice a low, confidential rumble. A cloud of cigar smoke, thick and cloying, drifted out of the room. She's got the look, she's got the name, she's got the story. The music. The music is the easy part. We've got that covered. We've got that covered. The words echoed in the silent hallway. We. He meant me? I was the we. The unnamed, uncredited, unseen engine that made the whole machine run. He wasn't just championing Maya, he was actively, consciously, packaging and selling my talent under her name. I backed away from the door silently, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I thought I had known the depths of their betrayal, but hearing it laid out so clinically, so transactionally, was a fresh kind of hell. I went up to my room, the forgotten textbook lying on my bed. But I wasn't thinking about school. I was thinking about how to build a fortress so high they could never touch me again. A few hours later, my bedroom door creaked open. It was Maya. She was holding one of my notebooks, not my main songbook, but a smaller one, where I jotted down rough ideas and snippets of melody. She had tears in her eyes. It was a spectacular performance. "Ella?" she whispered, her voice thick with fake despair. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm just so stuck. Dad put so much pressure on me with that showcase, and my mind is a total blank. I feel like such a fraud." "You are," I thought, my voice dripping with acid inside my head. "I saw this on your desk," she said, holding up my notebook as if it were evidence of a crime she was being forced to commit. And I read a few lines, and it was like you were speaking my soul. It's exactly what I've been trying to say. The act was so convincing, I almost felt a flicker of the old, familiar pity. She looked so small, so fragile, so overwhelmed. This was her greatest weapon. Her ability to appear vulnerable, to make you feel like you were the strong one, the one who had to save her. In my first life, I'd fallen for it every single time. I'd spent the rest of the night coaching her, feeding her my lines, my melodies, my emotions, until she could parrot them back convincingly. This time, I just looked at her, my expression carefully neutral. I didn't offer to help. I didn't say a word. I just waited. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. Her mask of distress began to slip. A flicker of impatience crossed her face. Finally, I gave a small, weary sigh. "You'll figure it out, Maya," I said, my voice soft. "You always do." I turned back to my homework, dismissing her. I heard her sharp intake of breath, the rustle of the notebook pages as she clutched it tighter. She stood there for a full minute, expecting more, expecting the usual easy capitulation. When it didn't come, she turned and left, closing the door a little too forcefully behind her. Later that night, at dinner, she cleared her throat. "Mom, Dad, I think I had a breakthrough." And then, with a clear, confident voice, she began to sing the opening verse of a song I had only started writing 2 days ago. It was unfinished, raw, and deeply personal. And she sang it for them as if it had sprung, fully formed, from her own tormented heart. My parents' faces lit up with adoration. Mom's eyes welled with tears. Dad nodded slowly, a proud smile on his face. I stared down at my plate, my hands clenched into fists under the dinner table. I could feel the sharp edge of my fingernails digging into my palms, a grounding pain in the surreal, infuriating circus of my family. I focused on that pain, on the metallic taste of blood where I'd bitten the inside of my cheek, and I smiled. I smiled my sweetest, most supportive, sisterly smile. The game had just begun, and they didn't even know they were playing. The first real shot was fired 2 weeks later. The weapon of choice, Midnight Dreams. It was, I had to admit, one of my best. It was a song about feeling lost and invisible in a city of millions, about seeing your own pain reflected in the cold glow of skyscraper windows. It was my anthem from my first life, written in a lonely apartment at 3 a.m. Now, it was about to become Maya's calling card. I knew she would come for it. It was the most complete, most commercially viable song in my journal. So, I set a trap. I left the journal on my desk, open to that exact page, and wedged a tiny, almost invisible scrap of paper in the spine. Then, I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there, my bedroom door cracked just enough to see a sliver of the hallway, and I waited. Around 1 a.m., the floorboards outside my room creaked. A sliver of light appeared under my door, then vanished. I counted to 60, then held my breath. My door eased open with a soft sigh. Maya crept in, a shadow among shadows. She moved with a practiced stealth that told me this wasn't her first time. She tiptoed to my desk, her back to me, and pulled out her phone. I watched, my body perfectly still, as the phone's flash went off once, twice, a third time. Each flash illuminated her face, her expression a mixture of guilt and grim determination. She was photographing the lyrics, stealing my soul one snapshot at a time. After a final, lingering look at the page, she slipped out of the room as silently as she'd entered. I waited until I heard her own door click shut before I let out the breath I was holding. A cold, hard fury settled in my stomach. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of my youth. This was different. It was patient, calculating. I got out of bed, checked my journal, the tiny scrap of paper was gone, dislodged when she opened the book. Confirmation, the bait had been taken. 2 weeks later was the annual school talent show. It was a small town affair, but to our parents, it was Carnegie Hall. Maya, naturally, was the headliner. "I'm going to be debuting a new original song," she'd announced at dinner the night before, avoiding my eyes. "It's called Midnight Dreams." "Oh, darling, that's wonderful," Mom had gushed. "I can't wait to hear it." Dad had simply nodded, that proud, proprietary smile on his face again. "Knock 'em dead, kid." I spent the entire show sitting between them in the school auditorium, a serene smile plastered on my face. When Maya walked on stage, just her and an acoustic guitar, a hush fell over the crowd. She looked the part, I had to give her that. She was beautiful, dressed in a simple white dress, looking every bit the sensitive, soulful artist. "This is a song that's really personal to me," she said, her voice soft and breathy. "It came to me late one night when I was feeling really lost." Then she began to play and to sing. She had the chords right, the melody was there, the lyrics were word for word what I had written, but something was missing. The song was a beautiful hollow shell. She was singing about pain she'd never felt, a loneliness she'd never known. She was a flawless mimic, but the emotion wasn't there. It was like watching a technically perfect actor crying without any tears. The crowd, of course, didn't know the difference. They were captivated. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. My parents were on their feet, beaming. Mom was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. I clapped along with everyone else, the sound sharp and rhythmic. My nails were digging painful crescents into my palms, but my smile never wavered. Let her have this little victory in a high school gym. It would make what came next so much sweeter. My counter move had to be precise. It couldn't be traced back to me. My revenge had to be silent. The school had an old, mostly forgotten music room in the basement. It housed a dusty, out-of-tune grand piano and some archaic recording equipment that nobody ever used. It was perfect. For 3 nights after the talent show, I snuck in after hours using the janitor's key I'd borrowed from the hook in the main office. The first night, I spent 4 hours tuning the piano by ear, the metallic twang of the strings echoing in the cavernous, empty room. The second night, I experimented with the old reel-to-reel recorder, figuring out its quirks, learning how to layer tracks. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decaying sheet music. The keys of the piano were cold and yellowed under my fingers, but when I played, the music that filled the silence was anything but. On the third night, I was ready. I set up a single microphone, hit record, and played. I didn't just sing Midnight Dreams, I bled it. I poured every ounce of my first life's loneliness, my heartbreak, my ghostly existence into that performance. I layered my own harmonies, the ones Maya had claimed to have hummed, creating a sound that was ethereal and haunting. My voice cracked with real emotion. My fingers caressed the keys with a sorrowful intimacy. It wasn't a performance, it was a confession. When I was done, the silence that followed was heavy, profound. I knew I had captured something real. I took the reel-to-reel tape and, using the school's AV club equipment, digitized the track into a single high-quality MP3 file. My final move was the most critical. Anonymity was everything. I went to the public library, used one of their computers, and created a new untraceable email address. Then I set up a profile on a popular music sharing platform, the kind where indie artists and unknown talents posted their work. I needed a name, an alias that would signify my rebirth. The choice was obvious. Alias Phoenix Rising. At 3 a.m., sitting in the dark of my own room using a public VPN I'd installed on my laptop, I hit publish. I uploaded my version of Midnight Dreams. The description was simple: a song for the sleepless, an echo in the dark. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and exhilaration. The file was out there, the ghost was in the machine. It took less than 48 hours for the fallout to begin. At first, it was just a few comments on the Phoenix Rising page. Wow, this is raw. I've never heard anything with so much emotion. Who is this? I need more. Then a popular indie music blogger found it. He posted a link with the headline, "Is this the most authentic song on the internet right now?" The post went viral. It was shared on social media, on forums, everywhere. The song exploded. And then, inevitably, people who had been at the talent show started making connections. Someone uploaded a shaky cell phone video of Maya's performance. The comparison was immediate and brutal. I was sitting at the breakfast table when Mom, scrolling through her phone, made a confused noise. "That's strange," she murmured. "What is it, dear?" Dad asked, not looking up from his paper. "It's this article. It's about Maya's song, Midnight Dreams." But they're talking about another version. They're saying Maya's is derivative. She looked at Maya, her brow furrowed. They're calling this other artist, this Phoenix, the real deal. They're saying her version is emotionally raw and yours is emotionally hollow. I watched as the color drained from Maya's face. She snatched the phone from Mom's hand, her eyes scanning the article frantically. Her knuckles were white. "Who is this?" she hissed, her voice trembling. "Who is Phoenix Rising?" "I have no idea," Mom said, flustered. "It's just some anonymous person, but people are being so cruel. They're calling Maya's version a pale imitation." The narrative had been set, and it was out of their control. Phoenix Rising was the mysterious, tortured artist. Maya was the pretty copycat. The internet had chosen authenticity over Polish. That night, there was a frantic pounding on my bedroom door. I opened it to find Maya standing there, her face pale, her mascara streaked from crying. The mask of the confident star was gone, replaced by the terrified face of a girl who was in way over her head. "Ella!" she sobbed, her voice thick with panic. "You have to help me!" I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed and raised an eyebrow. "Help you with what?" "My songwriting," she cried, gesturing wildly with her hands. "This Phoenix person. They're everything I'm supposed to be. The critics are tearing me apart. Dad said the label showcase is in jeopardy. They want to hear more of my original material, but I don't have any." She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. The same look she'd given me 100 times in our first life. The look that said, "Give me your talent. Give me your soul. Fix this for me." I felt a cold, satisfying calm settle over me. I had her right where I wanted her. "I don't know what to tell you, Maya," I said, my voice soft and deceptively sympathetic. "Maybe you just need to dig deeper, find your own voice." I used her own words against her, the same condescending, dismissive words she'd used at the Grammy podium while I was dying. I watched the recognition, the confusion, and the pure, unadulterated panic dawn on her face. For the first time in 2 lives, I had all the power, and I had no intention of giving it back. Maya's panic was a tangible thing, a frantic energy that filled the house for weeks. She became jumpy and irritable, snapping at our parents and spending hours in her room with a guitar, producing nothing but discordant, frustrated sounds. The showcase with Starfire Records was looming, and the pressure was mounting. In her desperation, she made her next mistake. She leaned on Chloe, and Chloe, ever the opportunist, saw her chance. My friendship with Chloe had continued, a carefully maintained charade. We still hung out, still shared secrets. Or rather, I let her think we did. I knew she was reporting everything back to Maya, so I played the part of the supportive, slightly clueless friend. "I just feel so bad for Maya," I'd say, picking at a loose thread on my jeans as we sat in my room. She's so talented, but she gets these awful creative blocks. Total tragedy, Chloe would agree, her eyes scanning my room, always searching. For my songbook, for scraps of lyrics. I kept them well hidden now. My counter move this time had to be more ambitious. Phoenix Rising had a viral hit, but one song wasn't a career. I needed to build a foundation, a network that had nothing to do with my family's world of manufactured pop. I started slipping out at night, telling my parents I was at a study group, and instead I dove headfirst into the city's underground music scene. These were not the polished, industry-friendly venues my father frequented. These were dive bars with sticky floors, cramped open mic nights in the back of coffee shops, and illegal warehouse shows where the bass vibrated through the concrete and into your bones. It was a world of real artists, musicians with scraped knuckles and worn-out guitars, poets whose words were raw and ragged, singers whose voices held genuine pain and joy. I never performed. I was a ghost here too, but a different kind. I was an observer, a networker. I'd buy a soda, stand in the back, and just listen. I learned who the tastemakers were, not the executives in suits, but the indie label scouts who looked like they hadn't slept in days, the influential sound engineers, the musicians everyone respected. I'd strike up conversations using a fake name, just a girl named Liz who loved music. That band was killer, I'd say to a guy leaning against the bar. The drum work was insane. The guy would turn out to be a producer for a small but respected indie label, Rumble Records. We'd talk for an hour about percussion techniques and recording styles. I wasn't trying to sell anything. I was just making connections, planting seeds, building a reputation as someone who knew her stuff. Meanwhile, the betrayal I knew was coming was taking shape. Maya, desperate for new material for the showcase, had hired a new manager on my father's advice, a slick, hungry guy named Marcus Vance. And Chloe, my dear friend Chloe, saw her opening. She started suggesting that she and I have jam sessions. Just for fun, she said one afternoon, her smile a little too bright. You play so beautifully, Ella. It might even help me get over my stage fright. I knew exactly what this was, so I agreed. We met in my garage, which I'd soundproofed with old mattresses, supposedly for my own practice. I played. I let new melodies flow, half-formed lyrics, interesting chord progressions. And Chloe sat in the corner, her phone on her lap, a tiny red light indicating it was recording everything. She thought I didn't notice. I noticed everything. She was selling my rough, unfinished ideas to Marcus Vance, who was then feeding them to Maya, trying to patch together enough material to fool the execs at Starfire. Chloe got a reward for her treachery. Marcus hired her as his official intern, which was a fancy title for Maya's assistant and idea thief. When Chloe told me the news, she could barely contain her glee. Can you believe it, Ella? My first real job in the music industry. It's all thanks to you, really. Our jam sessions really inspired Maya. I baked her a batch of celebration cookies. Chocolate chip, her favorite. As I handed them to her, I smiled my sweetest, most sincere smile. I'm so happy for you, Chloe. You deserve it. She hugged me, and I felt the cold, sharp sting of her betrayal, as tangible as broken glass. But my plan was already in motion. The cookies were my parting gift. Her downfall was already scheduled. Through my connections in the underground scene, I'd found out that Rumble Records was actively looking for a new, authentic voice to sign. They were tired of polished pop and wanted something real. They were, in fact, obsessed with the mystery of Phoenix Rising. Using a burner phone and a voice modulator, I made the call. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely dial the number I'd been given for the head of Ander, a woman named Sasha. Sasha speaking. Her voice was low and gravelly. Hello, I said, my modulated voice sounding robotic and strange. I'm calling on behalf of the artist known as Phoenix Rising. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Okay, Sasha said slowly. You have my attention. Phoenix is interested in a potential partnership, I continued, my voice steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. But on very specific terms. Anonymity is non-negotiable. Creative control must be absolute, and we want to see a commitment to authentic artistry. I told her I'd be sending over a new, unreleased track as a sign of good faith. The next day, I anonymously emailed Sasha a new song. This one was called Glass House, a searing indictment of fake friendships and stolen trust. The lyrics were pointed, sharp, and undeniably about Chloe. You live in a glass house, but you're throwing stones you didn't even make. Now for the final piece. I took one of the audio files from Chloe's phone. I'd managed to clone her cloud backup weeks ago, a little tech skill I'd picked up in my first life's lonely evenings. I chose a recording of one of our jam sessions. In it, you could clearly hear me working through the main melody of Glass House. Then you could hear Chloe's voice saying, "Oh, that's a good one. Maya will love that." I sent the audio file to the same indie music blogger who had broken the first story. The email was anonymous, the subject line simple: the ghostwriter behind the ghostwriter. The story dropped on a Friday morning. It was an atomic bomb. The blogger laid it all out. The audio recording, the striking similarity between the jam session melody and the new Phoenix Rising song that had been leaked to a few industry insiders. The narrative was explosive and damning. Chloe wasn't just an intern, she was an industrial spy, stealing intellectual property from her supposed best friend to prop up a failing pop star. Her reputation was obliterated in a single morning. Marcus Vance fired her via text message. Her social media was flooded with snake emojis. Her fake apologies, posted and quickly deleted, only made things worse. Her career in the music industry was over before it had even begun. I was walking home from school when a car screeched to a halt beside me. It was Maya. She threw the passenger door open, her face a mess of tears and fury. The sky had opened up, a sudden downpour soaking us both in seconds. "Get in," she ordered. I got in, shutting the door against the rain. She just stared ahead, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. "Chloe is ruined," she said, her voice a dead monotone. "My showcase is next week and every song I have is tainted. Marcus says Starfire is thinking of pulling out. They're saying I'm a fraud, that I have no integrity." The rain hammered against the windshield, mixing with her ragged sobs. She finally turned to me, her eyes wild with desperation. "This is all your fault." "My fault?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "How do you figure that?" "This Phoenix person. They're targeting me. First Midnight Dreams. Now this. It's like they know my every move. They're trying to destroy me." She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "But you can fix it. I know you can. Write me something new, something untouchable. Something so good they can't deny it." She was begging, the rain and her tears mingling on her face. "Please, Ella, you're the only one who can fix this. I'm begging you." I looked at her, at the sister who had built her life on my back, now crumbling under the first real weight she'd ever had to bear. I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy, just a cold, clean sense of victory. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I pulled my arm from her grasp and opened the car door. "I can't help you, Maya." I stepped out into the rain and walked away, not looking back, leaving her alone with the storm she had created. The final betrayal, the one that severed the last frayed thread of family obligation I might have felt, came from my father. I should have expected it. In his world, everything was a transaction, every person an asset or a liability. I had just never imagined he would put a price tag on my childhood. After the Chloe disaster, Maya's showcase was officially canceled. Starfire Records put her potential deal on indefinite hold, which was industry speak for never going to happen. The house was thick with a funereal silence. My parents walked on eggshells, their dreams of fame and fortune evaporating before their eyes. The panicked, whispered phone calls started soon after. I'd overhear snippets from behind my closed door. Words like investment, recoup, and breach of contract. My father had apparently made some very big promises, and maybe even spent some very big money banking on Maya's success. I was in my room one afternoon composing a new melody on my keyboard with headphones on when I felt a presence behind me. I turned and saw my father standing in the doorway, his face a grim, unreadable mask. "Ella," he said, his voice flat, "we need to talk." He led me to his study, the room that always smelled of stale cigar smoke and disappointment. He closed the door behind us. On his large mahogany desk was a thick contract and a check. What's this? I asked, though a cold dread was already creeping up my spine. This is a solution, he said, avoiding my eyes. He picked up the check, staring at it. You know all those old songs you wrote when you were a kid? The ones in those boxes in the attic? The little piano pieces, the silly love songs? I knew them. They were my first creative sparks, written with a childish innocence between the ages of 10 and 14. They were clumsy and simple, but they were mine. I do, I said slowly. Well, he sighed, placing the check back on the desk. Turns out they're not just silly little songs. They have value, a lot of value. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were cold, devoid of any paternal warmth. I've sold the publishing rights to your catalog of early compositions to Maya's record label. The air left my lungs. You... what? It's a way to salvage the situation, he said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. They see potential in the melodies. They can give them to real songwriters, professionals to polish up. They're going to rework them for a new artist they're developing. And in exchange, they've agreed to settle the financial mess from Maya's broken deal. He gestured to the contract. I've registered them as family assets. Since you're a minor and the compositions were created in my house, I have the right to administer them. Family assets. He had taken my childhood memories, the most private and pure parts of my creativity, and sold them for scrap to cover his own bad bets. He had strip-mined my past to pay for my sister's failed future. You had no right, I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it felt like it could split the earth. Don't be so dramatic, Ella, he snapped. It's just music, and this, he tapped the check, is $25,000. It's more than those songs were ever going to be worth. It keeps a roof over your head. It's for the good of the family. I stared at him, at this man who was my father, and I saw a complete stranger. A man who would sell his own daughter's soul and call it a sound business decision. In that moment, any lingering sentiment, any vestige of the girl who had once craved his approval, died. A month later, Maya's label, in a desperate attempt to recoup something, rushed out a new album for a different artist. It was called Childhood Echoes, and it was filled with polished, overproduced, soulless versions of my songs. The album flopped, but that wasn't the point. The point was the violation. Maya, to her credit, seemed genuinely ashamed. She tried to apologize, cornering me in the kitchen one night. Ella, I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was going to do that. It doesn't matter anymore, Maya, I said, my voice empty. And it was true. It didn't. I was already gone. My final passive performance was at the launch party for that album. My parents insisted I go to present a united family front. So I went. I wore a black dress and a serene smile. I sipped bitter champagne and watched as my father glad-handed executives, pretending he was still a major player. I listened as the label head gave a speech about discovering this treasure trove of raw, youthful talent. He was talking about me, but he didn't know it. No one did. I stood in a corner, a ghost at my own funeral, and felt nothing but an icy calm. This was the end of a chapter. While they were picking over the bones of my past, I was finalizing my future. 2 nights later, I took a taxi to a gleaming skyscraper downtown. I rode the silent express elevator to the 50th floor. The doors opened onto the plush, minimalist offices of Rumble Records. Sasha was waiting for me. This time, there was no voice modulator, no burner phone, just me. When she saw me, a flicker of surprise crossed her face, quickly replaced by a slow, knowing smile. I had a feeling, she said simply. She led me to a conference room with a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the entire city. The lights below sprawled out like scattered diamonds, a universe of possibility. On the polished glass table was a single thick document. The contract, she said, her voice soft. Everything we discussed. Full creative control, unprecedented royalty splits. A marketing budget that will make Starfire look like a lemonade stand. And, per your request, the Phoenix's clause. Your identity remains a complete secret for as long as you wish. I sat down, the leather of the chair creaking under my weight. I picked up the pen. Its weight felt heavy, significant. This wasn't just a record deal. This was my declaration of independence. This was my vindication. As I signed my real name, Ilara Vance, on the dotted line, I thought about the check on my father's desk. $25,000. The advance from Rumble Records, sitting in an escrow account that I alone controlled, was for $2 million. The rise of Phoenix Rising was meteoric. We released Glass House officially, and it shot to #1. We followed it with an EP of 4 new songs, all written in the quiet fury of my bedroom, all imbued with the raw emotion my family had tried to commodify and control. The songs dominated the streaming charts. Critics fell over themselves, calling Phoenix the voice of a generation, a once-in-a-lifetime talent, a mystery that has captivated the world. My music was everywhere, and Maya's was nowhere. The fallout for my family was swift and brutal. The label that bought my childhood songs sued my father for misrepresentation when the album failed to perform. Creditors started calling. The hushed, panicked phone calls became desperate, shouted arguments. I'd walk past the study and hear my father on the phone, his voice cracking, talking about foreclosure, about bankruptcy, about being utterly ruined. One evening, I overheard my mother crying, her voice thin and reedy. "I don't understand, Richard. Everything was supposed to be perfect. Maya was our star. Now her career is over, we're drowning in debt, and this Phoenix is a global sensation with songs that sound like they were written just for us." I stood in the hallway, listening to the sound of their empire imploding, and I didn't feel a single shred of pity. Autumn was coming, and the leaves were falling faster than they could count. Rumble Records booked Phoenix Rising for a special one-night-only concert at the legendary Apollo Theater. They announced it would be live-streamed globally, free of charge. The hype was insane. The mystery of who Phoenix was had reached a fever pitch, with online forums buzzing with theories. Some thought I was a disgraced pop star making a comeback. Others, an industry veteran writing under a pseudonym. No one ever suspected I was a 17-year-old girl from the suburbs. I knew my family would be watching. Their obsession with Phoenix was a strange cocktail of envy, hatred, and grudging admiration. They saw Phoenix as the architect of their downfall, the mysterious force that had sabotaged Maya's destiny. I had made sure they had front-row seats. Well, not literally, but I had my new assistant, a sharp, loyal woman named Lena, send them a private link to the highest quality stream, a courtesy from an anonymous fan. I wanted them to have a crystal-clear view of what was coming. The night of the show, the energy backstage was electric. Sasha gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You ready for this, kid?" "More than ready," I said. And it was true. There was no fear, no stage fright, just a profound, liberating sense of rightness. This was my moment, the one I had been working towards, not just for the past year, but for 2 lifetimes. I walked on stage to a roar that shook the historic building to its foundations. I was just a silhouette at first, standing against a stark white light, a hoodie obscuring my face, a guitar strapped over my shoulder. The crowd chanted my name. "Phoenix, Phoenix, Phoenix." I played a full set. I played Midnight Dreams, Glass House, and a dozen other songs they'd never heard before. Songs about betrayal, about rebirth, about finding your own strength in the wreckage of your life. With each song, I poured more of myself onto the stage, my voice growing stronger, more confident. The camera operators were incredible. A small crew I had handpicked with Sasha. They had specific instructions for the final song. For my encore, I chose a new song, one nobody had ever heard. It was called "The Ghost at the Feast." It was my story. It told of a girl who wrote the words for someone else to sing, who stood silently in the wings while another took the bows. As I reached the final, soaring chorus, I gave the signal. The main camera zoomed in, tight on my face, still hidden in the shadows of my hood. On the massive screen behind me, a montage began to play. It started with grainy home videos, a little girl with dark hair, me sitting at a piano, picking out a melody. Another clip of me at 10, proudly holding up a sheet of music. Then, photos. Me and Maya as kids. Me in the background, out of focus, while Maya posed for the camera. Me at the mixing board in my first life, my face pale with exhaustion. Then, the images became more specific. A screenshot of the blogger's article exposing Chloe. A copy of the contract my father signed selling my childhood compositions. The words family assets circled in red. A headline about Maya's canceled showcase. The camera pushed in closer on my face. I sang the final lines, my voice clear and ringing with power. You took the credit and I took the pain, but a phoenix always rises from the flame. And as the last chord faded, I reached up with one hand and slowly pulled back my hood. The lights came up, flooding my face. The camera held steady. My image, my 17-year-old face, was projected 50 feet high on the screen behind me and broadcast to millions of screens around the world. There was a collective gasp from the audience, a wave of shock that rippled through the theater. Then, an eruption of cheers, louder than anything before. The livestream chat, which was being projected on side screens, exploded into an unreadable waterfall of text. But I wasn't looking at that. I had instructed one cameraman to cut to a specific feed, the IP address I had sent to my family. And there, on a monitor only I could see, was my living room. My father, his face ashen, looking like he'd been struck by lightning. My mother, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief. And Maya. She was staring at the screen, her face a perfect white mask of shock. The girl she thought she had vanquished, the sister she had used as a stepping stone, was the very icon who had overshadowed her. The ghost was no longer a ghost. I let the applause wash over me for a moment before holding up a hand for silence. My name is Alara Vance, I said, my voice echoing through the speakers, steady and strong. And for a long time, other people have told my story. Tonight, I'm taking it back. I spent the next 10 minutes laying it all out. The ghostwriting, the stolen melodies, the betrayals. I didn't do it with anger, but with a calm, factual precision that was far more damning. And then, I delivered the final blows. My family believed they could profit from my talent while keeping me in the shadows, I said, looking directly into the camera, directly at them. They sold what they thought were my only assets for a paltry sum to cover their debts. The screen behind me changed. It was no longer my face, but a series of complex financial statements. Digital statements from offshore accounts, investment portfolios, real estate holdings. What they didn't know, I continued, my voice cold as ice, is that while they were selling my past, I was investing in my future. The advance for my first EP alone was $2 million. My current net worth, through Phoenix Rising's success and some very smart investments, is... I paused, letting the numbers on the screen speak for themselves. They were staggering. They made my father's desperate embezzlement look like a child stealing from a piggy bank. And I didn't do it alone. As I said this, the lights came up in a skybox overlooking the stage. Seated there were some of the most powerful people in the music industry. The legendary rock god whose poster was still on my wall, the head of the largest streaming service in the world, and Sasha, my champion from Rumble Records. Sasha spoke into a microphone from the box. We at Rumble Records, along with our associates, have been aware of Alara's situation for some time. We have been mentoring her, guiding her, and building a legal and financial fortress around her. We have been honored to help a true artist reclaim her narrative. Any attempts to challenge her ownership of her work or her finances will be met with the full force of our legal teams. The message was unmistakable. I wasn't just a 17-year-old girl. I was an untouchable institution. I ended the show, thanked the audience, and walked off stage, my heart finally, blessedly, quiet. The confrontation I knew was coming happened 2 days later. I was in my penthouse apartment, the first of my real estate acquisitions, when my assistant Lena buzzed me. "Your family is here," she said, her voice laced with disapproval. "They don't have an appointment." "Send them up, Lena," I said. They walked into my living room, a room larger than the entire ground floor of their house, and they looked small, defeated. The three of them, Mom, Dad, Maya, stood there dwarfed by the panoramic city view behind them. Then, in a clumsy, uncoordinated movement, they knelt. All three of them, on my expensive Persian rug. "Ella," my father started, his voice thick, unrecognizable. We are so sorry. We were wrong, blind, stupid. We didn't understand. We didn't see you." "We love you, sweetheart," my mother sobbed, her words tumbling over my father's. "We were just so caught up in Maya's dream. We can fix this. We can be a family again. A real family." Maya was last. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, a hollowed-out version of the sister I once knew. "You were always the talented one, Ella. I was just jealous and weak. Please, give us another chance. Give me another chance." Their words, their promises of change, their desperate apologies, they were like water rushing over stone. I listened to it all, my expression unreadable. In my first life, this moment would have been everything I ever wanted, their validation, their apology. But I wasn't that girl anymore. That girl was dead. When they had finally fallen silent, their pleas hanging in the air like dust motes, I looked at each of them in turn. My father, the failed businessman. My mother, the failed kingmaker. My sister, the failed star. I met their eyes with a steady, unbreakable resolve. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, but it filled the cavernous room with its finality. No! The word was so small, yet it was a wall of steel. "I gave you everything once," I said, my voice unshakable. "My music, my time, my dreams, my life. You took it all and left me with nothing. I will not make that mistake again." I turned and walked towards the window, turning my back on them, on the past they represented. I didn't need to see them out. Their chapter in my story was finally completely over. The sunset from my penthouse terrace was a spectacular nightly event. It painted the sky in fiery strokes of orange, pink, and purple, the colors reflecting off the endless glass and steel of the city below. The metropolis that had once felt so lonely and alien, a city of a million windows hiding a million heartbreaks, now sprawled before me like a carpet of scattered diamonds. A kingdom I had built for myself. A cool breeze, carrying the distant, muted sounds of traffic and life, whispered through my hair. For the first time, it smelled like freedom. Life after the reveal, after the no, was quieter than I had anticipated. The world, of course, had been loud. Talk shows, magazine covers, endless online think pieces about the Phoenix unmasked. But my world, my actual day-to-day existence had become peaceful. I had my sanctuary, this apartment in the sky, a fortress of solitude that wasn't lonely. It was a choice. My relationship with music transformed completely. There was no more fear, no more hiding. I no longer had to write for survival or for revenge. I wrote for joy. The grand piano in the corner of my living room, a magnificent Steinway that was a gift to myself, was my closest friend. My fingers would dance across the keys, melodies flowing without the constant gnawing anxiety of who might be listening, who might steal them. The songs that emerged were different. They were lighter, more hopeful. They were about finding peace, not fighting wars. They were about the view from the top of the mountain, not the grueling climb. The biggest change, however, was in the people around me. My old life had been defined by a toxic, claustrophobic circle of users and enablers. My new life was filled with genuine connection. Sasha, my label head, became more than a mentor. She was a fierce, protective friend who saw me as an artist and a person, not just a commodity. Lena, my assistant, was my rock, anticipating my needs with an almost psychic intuition and guarding my privacy like a dragon. My collaborators were no longer people I was forced to prop up, but peers I respected and admired. The legendary rock god from the skybox, a man named Jax, became a frequent visitor. He'd come over with his worn acoustic guitar, and we'd spend hours in my home studio just trading riffs and stories. He never treated me like a kid. He treated me like an equal. "You've got an old soul, Alara," he'd say, smiling over his coffee. "You just had to live 2 lives to catch up with it." We would fill the studio with laughter, with the sounds of creative sparks flying. We were surrounded by a new family, a chosen family of musicians, producers, and writers who were there for the love of the art, not the love of the credit. We created art together, our laughter warming the spaces that had once been filled with my solitary, furious work. My success, now attached to my real name, became international. I wasn't just Phoenix Rising, the American mystery. I was Alara Vance, the artist. I read reviews of my album from Tokyo, Berlin, and London, all praising the authentic voice, the raw and honest songwriting. My passport filled with stamps from a world tour, a tour I did on my own terms, playing venues I chose with a crew I trusted. Each stamp in that little book felt like a mark of merit, a testament to a world I had built for myself. There were, of course, attempts at contact from the other side. A letter from my mother, filled with nostalgic reminiscences of a happy childhood that had never existed. An email from my father's lawyer, a pathetic, thinly veiled request for financial aid. A single desperate text from Maya. Are you happy? I never replied. Replying would be engaging with a past that no longer had any claim on me. Their ghosts were banished. My tour ended with a sold-out show at a festival on a moonlit beach in Portugal. After the last encore, after the roar of the crowd had faded and been replaced by the gentle, rhythmic sigh of the ocean, I slipped away from the after-party. I took off my shoes and walked along the water's edge, the cool, damp sand molding to my feet. The waves washed in, erasing my footprints almost as soon as I made them. I thought about the girl who died in that car crash, her heart full of resentment and unfulfilled dreams. I thought about the 16-year-old who woke up with a second chance and a heart full of cold, hard resolve. They felt like people I had read about in a book, characters in a dramatic story that had finally reached its conclusion. I looked up at the moon, a perfect silver disk in the black velvet sky. A new song was beginning to form in my mind, a quiet melody about the tide, about letting go, about the peace that comes when you stop fighting and simply walk forward. I didn't rush to write it down. I knew it would be there tomorrow and the day after that. The music was mine now, forever. I turned away from the water, my back to the endless dark ocean that had washed away the last traces of who I used to be. My footprints pointed forward, up the beach, toward the lights, toward the music, toward tomorrow, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I was excited to see what the next day would bring.